over to you, Bob. Appreciate it. Thanks for being here.
Sure. And just to tag on to that, thanks for having us, Michael, and always a pleasure to work with you. And the questions, all the questions we got, I will personally address, and then WorkProud will send them to everyone as well. So the questions were all over the map, which is exciting. We're going to drill in on the ones that were specifically on this topic here in our time today. But I had just 2 slides I wanted to start with, and I have worked with hundreds, if not thousands, of companies on this topic. And what I generically have seen is that most companies everyone's doing something, and a lot of companies are doing something that they started in 1940 and they keep doing it year after year, and no one's along the way has ever stopped to say, hey, is it still working? It's like, no, we budgeted last year, let's do this year, maybe add 10%, and the same thing over and over. And then, we're wondering why it's not resonating, or why people are leaving, or why no one's excited about it. And well, it's nothing lasts forever, and we're in a very, very dynamic time in our country in terms of work and how work is done and where it's done, and we're in a critical time of a shortage of skilled labor, and so you've got to address the people that you have. And a lot of questions were about, well, we've got different types and different levels and different locations, and yes, you have to make sure you're checking all of those on the efforts you're doing. One size does not fit all, especially one size that you started in 1940 or 1920. So historically, on the big picture, this is what I see: 92% of companies have years of service program. You're here for 5 years, you get a pin. You're here 10 years, you get a selection, or you get a plaque. And you're here 15 years, you get something else. And it's very staid. And I've never met anyone that stayed another day in their job to get their 10-year pin. It's just doesn't speak to the actual real pressing needs of employees today and what's important to them. You need to wrap your recognition around what's important to them. So years of service doesn't cut it in and of itself. Now, it's okay to recognize years of service, I think, but I find a lot of companies will reward years of service. They spend this much money and this much more if it's 10 years, and even more than that if it's 15. And on that, or things like holiday parties, birthdays, summer picnics, retirement parties, and then because they're doing all that, they spent the whole budget. And then they conclude, well, it must be working because we're spending money on it every year. And maybe our employees aren't grateful. That's the problem. The ingrates, they always want more. It's like, no, you're doing the wrong things, So that's where it starts, is what are you doing now, and is it working? And the only way you can answer that is by checking in with your people and seeing what do they want. So and I had go back to the previous slide one more time, and like the one employee of the month, that sounds like it's well, that's relevant, calling out performance. But what happens is that when you started it was relevant, and the first person, well, they're the best, and everyone recognizes that they're the employee of the month. But what happens, and it may be 2 months, 2 years, or whatever, but you get to the point where there's a group sitting around a conference table saying, well, we got to pick an employee of the month. Really? We just did that. Yeah, 30 days ago. It's a new month. And well, come on, we got a lot to do. And what about Sally at the front desk? She is so good with our call-ins and the clients. And well, she got it 2 months ago, so she's off the table. And now we're hard finding the next person. What about Joe in shipping? Does he deserve it? Who cares? We're going to be here all day. And so you give it to Joe, and he goes, well, finally someone noticed me, But basically, what you have is a dead program. It's not speaking to anybody, and you keep flogging it. and hoping it's going to cure your recruitment and retention needs, and you're not even in the game anymore because everything's changed around it. So and then there's different strategies of how do you move from that to something else, and we'll get into some of those. But so this is what people have done, and it's become cemented because we've always done it, and you gotta start with changing the thinking about it and say, is what we're doing working? Or who doesn't it touch? And do the people that experience these things actually value them? Because more times than not, they do not. I remember the company I worked for, we had a Christmas party, and okay, everyone's gonna be excited about the holiday party. And my wife didn't want to go. We did last year. We did. Remember that one person who got drunk and told off the CEO? It was embarrassing. I don't want to go. Or you're doing a picnic and the kids don't want to go. It's sort of like now you're forcing people to do stuff, and that's actually the opposite of motivation. So this is what we've done now. The next slide kind of captures where it's evolved to, and so instead of just focusing on presents, years of service, birthday parties, holidays, that's not, to me, that's a huge problem. You got to focus on performance. This is the biggest driver of performance and motivation known to man. Okay, the greatest principle in the world to drive performance. You won't get it if you're doing it on who happens to be in the building when we have the party. And so this is a big disconnect. Stop focusing just on presence and the things that really don't matter to people, and focus on the things that do matter to them. They did a good job, or to the company. So things that make us mutually successful. And if you do that, guess what? You'll get more performance. And that's what you want. So that's the key right there, is start with things that matter for your mutual success. No, so instead of going down the list, the second one, doing random or disjointed stuff, every company does something. I worked with Bank of America. They had identified 132 different things that people were doing, in their departments and whatnot. And that's great. They're doing something, but you've got a chance to consolidate and have a larger umbrella that says all the stuff we're doing is driving this mission and these strategic objectives, and everything follows from that. If it's just random, and this department's doing, Starbucks cars, and this department's doing saving their money and taking everyone to a movie, you're going to get mixed results, and they're not going to be that relevant. This is often an administrative burden, and you've got technology today that lifts that burden and makes it efficient. And we'll talk more about that. That's a great thing. And if you aren't doing something like that, you got to consider it, because technology is driving everything today, and it even drives this blue smoke and soft feely topic if you set it up well. And if you have that technology, you are then on track to be better. So it's a journey. Move in the direction where it'll be more effective, and then get better and better and better. Not just what we did last year plus 10%, or, why don't we try this? The company I worked with before used to do this. They gave out pens. It's like, performance, start with performance. No measurement and tracking. Again, if you're doing random stuff, you don't even know what you did and what you got. And so when it comes up to look at next year's budget, say, well, what did we get out of that last year? Well, who knows? People seem to like it. That's not good enough. Did it drive the performance we wanted? And if so, it's easier to justify doing it again. So you've got to have a systematic measurement and tracking of your activities tied to performance. And now you're on the track to make this, give it the power that it already has to drive the things that are essential to your success. Okay. And finally, and this came up in the questions a lot, one size fits all. We've always done this, but the younger employees don't value that, or the remote people, they can't relate to it. So you got to move off one size fits all, and you got to look at the different populations, however you define it, different job types, different levels, different locations, in office versus virtual, and you got to speak to each of them. And the power of having an umbrella that drives all this allows that variance and flexibility. So those are just the initial questions, the initial statement I want to make on this topic, that the most powerful thing you can do, but you're not going to get the power from it if you don't do it, if you don't do it right. So with that, Michael.
Yeah, that's a great sort of setup and a context. Phil, did you want to add any comments to that, or have me go into the questions just as a way to set the scene for these questions that everybody submitted?
Well, you know, it's funny. You all know I haven't seen these slides until just a few minutes ago. And I was doing a presentation on updating recognition programs. And I'm telling you, the things you put down and where you were headed to is exactly what we did. We actually identified those areas and did those things in our transformation from an old paper-based system to a new, cloud-based system.
Well, why don't you go and tell a little bit of the story for your history, and then that contextualizes it, and then people have an understanding of the questions as we go through them.
Sure. I work for a company. We are a national multi-family apartment owner, developer. We build, lease, and manage apartment buildings across the U.S. in soon to be 11 key markets. As such, we're very distributed. When you own an apartment community, in a city, you might have 8 or 10. Those are 8 or 10 individual entities. And then you've got regional management reporting to corporate level folks. People are always on the move, lots of travel, lots of distributed people at, really, I think we've got about 111 locations with roughly about 900 employees across the US. And we used to have paper-based programs. We would issue cards, if you spot awards, you'd see someone doing something well, you'd hand them a card. Of course, accounting for all them was a challenge, and audit would always zing people and say, well, where are your 11 cards? And, trying to track where those were, because they were worth money. They were either time off or something else. And that all equates to money. We had basically a lot of programs. We did a employee of the quarter. And just like Bob said, we're sitting around on a conference call saying, okay, well, we picked Michael last month, so it can't be him. What about so-and-so? They did this. Well, I think so-and-so did that. Well, which one should we pick? I don't know. Let's pick this one this month, and then we'll just pick the next one for the next quarter, so we don't have to worry about it. It wasn't really tied to people being valued. And then worst of all, because most of it happened in a very non-transparent way, we got it wrong a lot of the times. And we would pick somebody, and all the coworkers would say, oh my God, why are they picked? They're a jerk. They didn't show up for 8 days or whatever it was, because we're doing it from remote regions. We don't really see what's happening on the ground. So we decided there's got to be a better way. And we were looking for something that was modern, that could be accessible from anywhere, that employees, it wasn't just depending on the supervisor to give recognition, but your coworker could give you recognition, or you could give recognition to other people, what I like to call silent employees, people in accounting who don't necessarily get noticed, even though they work really hard. And so we started looking at a number of different organizations who could do this, brought them in, eventually picked, I'll say WorkProud, but and we ended up building a program that we could customize around what was important to us. The things we focused on were social recognition. Now, social recognition does not involve any award of monetary value. It's just a thank you and an expression of appreciation. We did bring in the ability to award people with stuff. And, we did it really because we are a multi-generational company. And we've got people who are brand new up to people who've been with the company for 30-something years. When you've been around a long time off with pay is not that important. But when you're brand new and you only have a couple weeks of vacation or time off, it's really important. So we gave people the ability to take time off with pay, do experiences, buy stuff, merchandise, or gift cards. And we see a lot of people that actually redeem their points for time off with pay, which is interesting. Another thing that Gables has, which is a nice little benefit, is after 10 years of service, everyone, no matter what level you're at, gets a paid 6-week sabbatical. And then every 5 years after that, you get another one. Well, people at the top of the organization don't necessarily live paycheck to paycheck, so they get this sabbatical and they go on these world trips, right? They go China, or, well, maybe not now, but they go to nice exotic places, have an amazing time. But people who are, essentially porters or maintenance technicians at a community are probably living more paycheck to paycheck. They've got car payments, rent, or a home payment. They've got childcare issues. They're getting this 6-week time off, but it's a staycation, not a vacation. As such, we made the points so they don't expire, so people can save them up over a number of years, and they get the time off with pay, but they also have, collected these points so they can use for cruises, airlines, hotels, etc., and they can make it into something really special. So we really looked at our organization and said, what are all the kind of pain points? Like, what are all the things we'd like to solve? And then developed a program that could do that. One other thing, we had you'll know this, we had a sales program called the Circle of Excellence. And this is the top leasing people in the organization. And at the end of the year, we would recognize everybody. It was 1 day a year in each region. And the top leasing people in each region were chosen to be Circle of Excellence. And when they were picked, they were surprised and they were happy. And, they couldn't believe they got picked. Now, I looked at that and said, well, why don't they know why they got picked? And they didn't know because they didn't know how much they sold, and they didn't know how much anyone else sold either. Well, that doesn't drive performance. You didn't have to give them anything. They were doing it anyway. So now we've got a sales program. When our people log in to WorkProud, they actually see their ranking of how many move-ins, that's what we consider a sale, how many move-ins they have relative to other people in their position. And the top winner wins something every quarter. So every quarter it resets, we do it again. So not once a year, but once a quarter. So what we do is we made it a much more powerful program that actually drives a result. And we connected it to our property management system. So people can, every day they get an update, they see exactly where they stand against people. So at the end of the quarter, you better believe it. It really, I get people calling my department saying, hey, I don't see this move-in recorded yet. So I know people are paying attention. I know people are listening.
So thanks for the introductions. That's a great background. So let me ask one and very brief response to this, because I think it sort of puts a nice bow on your commentary. Prior to and post. So firstly, Phil, you did this change about how many years ago?
I think it's about 7 years ago now.
Okay, so enough so that it's all settled and everybody, this didn't happen just sort of last week. It's all new and fresh. Is the program wailing and waning over time, i.e., has it got fatigue? And I'm not talking about us, I'm just talking about your approach to modernization. Is it fatiguing?
No, in fact, in the beginning, I don't know if you've read the book, The Tipping Point, but it took a lot of energy and effort to create the change. In fact, what was funny is people would reminisce about the old programs. We called them Spotlight Awards. It was one time a year. Michael, if you did something great today, you wouldn't get recognized until March. And if you did something great next April, you wouldn't get recognized till the following March, which, as you know, is not a great way to recognize performance. The program today, once we got people to buy into it and over the change, it actually is pretty much self-sustaining. I can go on there any day of the week, and there are coworkers and supervisors at all levels giving people recognition. So it's really taken off.
And have you, from a budgetary answering finance question, spent more or less or about the same when we're looking at Bob's sort of summation slide here, from a simplistic the ROI is same money, bigger impact, less money, bigger impact. How would you comment to the audience as you move from traditional to modern?
Sure. So we are owned by a real estate investment bank in New York. Gables is actually an open-ended fund. We raise capital, and as such, ROI to investors is paramount. Because of that, I'm given a budget, and I need to manage to that budget. The budget we had before is essentially the same as the budget now. Just the frequency and the way points are awarded and distributed is different. We've made it so it's much easier to do it, much easier to track, and high performers tend to see a disproportionate amount of rewards to people who are just kind of checking the box.
All right. Well, that's a great setup for people's perspectives. Let me get into some of the questions, because there was a lot and some interesting ones. So first question, and interestingly, it was, thank you, Lee Staub from DBT Labs. The first question, which is great. And, to put into context, there's 77 questions, all right? But anyway, we're going to try pick some.
Read quick.
And then, as I mentioned, and then, speak as quickly as possible. So Lee asks, if an organization made one change or implemented one program for employee recognition, what would drive the biggest ROI? Bob, I think that's a great one for you.
Yes. If you just do one thing differently, get your managers to thank their employees when they do good work. That's the king. That's the top one. And I know people say, well, that's simple. We could do that. Can you really? Because you can't, you send an email, make it happen. You got to ask, you got to make sure they know the significance of it. You've got to, if need be, have them practice it. It doesn't happen by magic, and you have to keep at it until the reality is that people, every person in your organization feels valued. And they feel valued for the work that they were hired to do and did a good job at it. If you don't do that, you will have people that are working hard that will one day, and maybe it's a week, maybe it's a year, maybe it's 10 years, say, what the heck am I doing here? I do good work and no one ever says anything, and all of a sudden they make a decision not to hit it so hard. I've talked to a lot of employees that just like that, they stopped taking home work. Just like that, they stopped volunteering for extra assignments because no one valued it when they did. So why am I killing myself here when I could, get more exercise or spend more time with my family or whatever? And that's not the direction you want them to go, to get higher performance and more commitment. You want them to be more excited about the work they're doing. And so you've got to give the external validation of that was a great job, Michael. Thanks so much for doing that. And as simple as that is, only 12% of employees say that they feel valued for the job they were hired to do. This with 80% of managers think that they're pretty good at the stuff we're talking about. Oh, we're all over it. We just had a party. We're doing this, and because you're doing activity doesn't mean you're making people feel valued. That's a very personal, individual thing, and you can't legislate it to everybody. You can't. I've run into some managers and say, everyone's doing a great job. Unless you hear from me otherwise, assume you're doing good work. That's not going to cut it. That doesn't make any one person feel special. Now, it does make them feel special if you call them in your office to say, hey, I just want to tell you, I looked over the numbers and your activity report. You just nailed it this month. I tell you what, it was just classic. I'm not sure we could have achieved our goals without your personal efforts. Thank you so, so much. So as easy as that sounds, making that a priority would be the one thing that I would say make happen.
Phil, did you want to respond to that or have a comment?
I agree with Bob how important recognition is. I've come to the conclusion that managers are not great at recognizing people. It's funny, I often say we've got great property managers, great maintenance managers, not necessarily great people managers. They're really good at managing the job, not necessarily being great leaders. And they don't remember to thank people. In fact, Even people on my team will do big projects, and they think when they're done with the project, they're done. They forget about thanking the team that actually contributed all the extra work. I think if I were to say one thing, it would be give coworkers the ability to thank each other. Here it's kind of like an Instagram or a Facebook. Somebody will post a comment and say, Bob, you did a great job with whatever. And then people will chime in with comments and likes, and it just all adds in. And when that person reads all these nice things that their peers are saying about them, it has the same effect as the comment from the supervisor, which often comes also because the supervisor also gets notified that Bob got this recognition.
So a double hit, basically. That's better than no
It's
hit.
a double hit. Yeah, well, it's better than nothing. Yeah.
Recognition has a multiplier effect. And so if you see it, you can add on, you can extend it. You get a note from a customer, you can add a note to that, you can pass it on to the employee, you can pass it on to their manager, you can post it on the a board, whether it's a physical board or an electronic one. There's anything you could do, you can add context to it to get more mileage out of it. And each time you recognize somebody, you're also sending a message to everyone else. This is a type of thing that gets noticed around here. And so it will naturally make them want to, will draw them into doing those type of things that were called out. So it's, as I said, the most powerful principle known to mankind, that you get what you're worth.
So, all right.
Oh, Michael, one last thing, just building on what Bob just said. And the other thing is, it relates to ROI with that. Thank yous are zero cost. I'm not talking points or anything. Coworkers can't give each other points. They can just give each other thanks. It's zero cost, but it has such an incredible impact on them feeling appreciated and valued by other people on their team.
So not leaving it to chance, which is what most organizations do. And then some people, a few, are good at it and most people don't do it, but setting up a system in the context where this is what we do around here. We're always calling out performance. We're always quick to catch people doing things right. This is what it means to work here. And now, guess what? It's part of the culture. And you have that, and then people can't imagine not having it. And it's all of a sudden, it happens more automatically. So as you do the right things over time, it creates a multiplier in and of itself to become a stronger culture of recognition. And once you hit that mark, and Michael, I know you've heard me say this a lot before, that there's overwhelming evidence that your people will feel 5 times more valued if you have a culture of recognition. They'll be 6 times more likely to have agency, to talk about what a great company they work with their friends, their family, even acquaintances. They will be 7 times more likely to stay with your organization for their career. Let me repeat that. 7 times more likely to stay with the organization for their career if they're in a culture of recognition, and 11 times more committed to the mission, to their manager, and to the company. Huge benefits that come from a zero cost activity, infinite ROI, basically.
So let's and those are all excellent comments, and a very, I know there's some enthusiastic speakers. I want to just write a tiny bit of commentary to this. First is in this next sort of area and section. So the first is, we had done a study with one of our large clients in healthcare, 50,000 employees. The summation of the study was, if the employee after the onboarding process wasn't recognized at a reasonable rate relative to their co-workers in the first 6 months, they were 70% more likely to turn. All right, 70% more likely. So irrespective of the fact that it actually doesn't cost a lot to do recognition well, and that you have to systematize it because we aren't very good at doing it, and it's not necessarily unnatural, but there aren't systems, processes, and investments by companies to get people to do it regularly. That's part of what we're all talking about when we get on this.
Just a point of information, you said 70% more likely to what?
To leave, to turn over, to resign. Thank you.
And I remember seeing that study, and if I recall, The nurse population in particular, there was a direct line correlation between the amount of recognition they got and how long they stayed in the organization. Direct line.
Precisely. So that sort of then now moves into the next question that I'm going to sort of get to. It just contextualizes, you know, what Bob and Phil were sort of sharing in hard data and hard numbers. Copy of the studies available from the website, or feel free to email any of us. We'll get a copy. So now, before I ask this question, I just want to remind everybody this important thing for those that have got teenagers or young people in their family or grandchildren, depending on generation. Remember, we have 5 generations in the workforce currently, 5 generations. And the bottom 2 generations, which are probably, Bob can attest to this, they may be the majority of the workforce already, if not soon to be.
75% by 2025.
Communicate with each other and with their parents, right, on family matters via text, okay? Text messages or the corresponding, communications app or tool. So I just want to remind everybody, whether we like it or not, right? We can't change that. That's already programmed in, and it's programmed now into what will be 100% of the workforce in due course, and there's no trend to counter this over time. So Christine Baum, Employee Engagement Manager, asks a great question. How do you recognize employees on a virtual platform without compromising that personal touch, and how to get involved, VPs and leadership involved in recognition? Bob.
Well, it's a couple questions there, but you're dead on. You've got to use the communication techniques that the population uses, and for the younger generation, it is text, and it doesn't mean it's only text. And so one of the challenges with technology, Michael Nesbitt in his book decades ago, and Megatrends, said the more high tech we become, the more high touch we need. So you still got to remember to have the personal touch to it, that sometimes get lost when you're only doing exclusively electronic or emails. I've had employees tell me, my boss used to stick their head in my office when I did a good job and say a few things. I got a chance to see them, and now I get an email with some points attached. It's kind of hollow and doesn't quite resonate. So you can't. Technology is powerful, but you got to keep the personal touch, and so that might be adding on to the technology to stop by where you can, or to call the person personally and say, this is too important to pass up. I had to comment that, wow, that was a great presentation you made, or whatever it might be, because that does matter and that does resonate, and that emotional charge is part of it. You can thank somebody in 10 seconds in the hallway, and in that that's providing significant feedback, but it's also providing an emotional charge when you add you to it. This is why I was so excited about your success, why I'm so proud that you're on my team. Don't leave that behind. Include that. It doesn't have to be every time, but as much as you can to keep the personal touch a part of it. The second question you had was around getting executive buy-in. Of course, very critical on this whole topic, because ultimately, if the executives don't buy in, it's not going to go anywhere. And so you have to have a strategy to loop them in. I know when I worked with Qualcomm, and Michael, you were part of that we pinpointed 46,000 employees, and we identified 4 or 5 top managers that were good at recognition. And those are our peeps, and we got them. I remember we got them on a stage, and I interviewed them, and we invited 300 other executives to come listen. And basically, I just played devil's advocate. I learned that you take time to visit people in their offices to talk about a good job. You can't possibly have time to do that you're heading up cell phone technology, and you don't have time to do that type of stuff. No, and the person would say, no, back it up there. That's why we're able to make our goals. That's why we don't have constant turnover, is because we have a strong team, because I call out and they all feel valued and are committed to our mutual goal. So this little activity this blue smoke and mirrors, feel good type of activity is powerful at driving hard numbers and hard success in any technology, in any company. And your executives, if you have someone that do it, you've got to put them on a pedestal so they become a role model for other people. So that's one of many strategies to get executive buy-in. You've got to have sponsorships.
What do you think, Phil, about
the team as part of it? Go ahead.
Sorry, Bob, apologize. But so what do you think, Phil, about the sort of, executive role, i.e., are they important? And if so, are they involved in yours, or how did you get them involved? And what are some of the, conversations that you've had or others have had to help get them to become a supporter?
So yeah, we've got support right from the top, and we've had that since the beginning. Our executive team has always really been, they know success doesn't happen without our teams. We're not making it happen from our offices. And it's important to make sure that the people who are actually doing the work day to day feel recognized and know that they're important. And one of the nice things about this system is it gives you the ability to, if our CEO sends a note, a thank you via our program, which is called Gables Ovations, to an employee, a lot of times we see them end up on Instagram or LinkedIn or Facebook, like, oh my God, I can't believe I got called out by the CEO in a very positive way. By the way, one of the things Bob said before that kind of hit me was there's nothing better, we talked about the texting piece, and there's nothing better than running to someone and saying thank you, that personal connection. Unfortunately, with us, because we're so distributed, I look at me, I'm in an office in DC. My own team is spread out between Florida, Texas, everywhere, basically. As a result, we have to find creative ways to do it. One of the things about the system that allows us to do that is now, if I post kudos or a thank you to someone, I can actually leave a personal video message, which will also play right on the screen. So everyone can actually see, including that individual, the heartfelt thank you that's being conveyed, which is kind of nice. And we're trying to get more and more of our, I don't know why people don't like being on video, but I'm trying to get more and more of our executives to adopt that. But like everything, it's a change and it just takes time to get it going.
All right, good responses. So here's another great question. Leslie Fettinger, thank you, Director of Employee Engagement. She asked a great question. So how do you transition to a new approach of recognition when, in inverted commas, we have always done it this way? And even acknowledges that she's said the same words herself. Phil, maybe you want to start that process of why did you even kickstart this in your head? And then how did you sort of build the momentum to make the case, to make the transition, etc.?
So it wasn't hard to look at the old program and see that it really didn't drive any kind of performance at any level, or really check the box on even appreciation. We did appreciation events in each of our markets one time per year, as I mentioned, and we spent a lot of money. When you looked at the breakdown of how much money was spent on recognition, it turns out over half of the dollars being spent were spent on the events, not even on the recognition in themselves. And when you looked at the selection process, it was nothing but flawed in that it was really more of a popularity contest than anything else. And frankly, if we all picked Bob and then there was anybody as part of the group that said, oh no, Bob was late 2 hours last week, he shouldn't win it, we would just go to the next person. No transparency, not really connected to reality. It would be a good way of saying it. The process to change it is a little bit of time and effort. Part is we announced a desire to change it and painted a vision of what the future of recognition could look like. And I did it at the events. So in February, when we were doing all these events, stood up and said, I know we do this today. In the future, we're going to do it like this, and painted a picture. You'll get recognized all the time, and you can get awards and you could get this. I tried to honestly demonize the current process and make the new process seem like the hero. And I brought together a cross-functional group of people from across the company, people from corporate, people from our operations teams, both in maintenance and people in marketing, anybody I thought, IT, anybody I thought that could really help us to shape it, that would represent their group in a positive way. And most importantly, could go back and communicate to those groups on what we were doing so you'd have adoption later. Once we had developed it, it was time to roll it out. We had no money. If you remember, in February, we blew the whole budget for that year. So there's no dollars. And what did I say about dollars? Like, it's not like no fairy comes along and goes, okay, here's an extra, bunch of money to go sprinkle around. So we launched the program and said, we are going to test it for a period of time, pilot. I love those words. We're going to pilot the program without points. And just as social recognition, it's an opportunity for you to thank people. And, we also started to promote people's birthdays and anniversaries and try to make it sticky, give people a reason to go in there for other than just to read recognition. We linked it to our wellness program. Anything I could do to try to tie it into another existing HR program, I did, because I wanted it to have as many points, like an octopus. The more anchors it has, the more likely it's going to stick. And it ended up working. We ended up rolling out points the following year. And but what's funny is I did that because I had no money. That's between us friends right here. But we actually realized that we needed to make some changes, and it was a good thing because there were people who were trying to give recognition. They thought they're giving it to one person. They gave it to everyone in the region. Imagine if they distributed points to everyone in the region unknowingly. So we had to make some configuration changes to make sure that didn't happen. When we launched the next year, it got embedded. We launched the sales program, and it just took off from there.
So let me interject a question in respect of time and some good ones. And I think this is a perfect setup for you, Bob, and a transition from Philip. Philip says, we didn't have points in the first year. We did non-monetary recognition. There's a couple of questions from some of the folks. I won't call you out by name, but appreciate the asking. They may be in organizations, let's say that you are a governmental organization, and so asking for budget for this kind of category becomes more difficult. And Bob, there's a certain retailer in mind that and I know that we do work for together, that you might think about them as a reference point. But the role of points relative to recognition and to then answer to a question with government employees that might find it difficult to justify a sort of budget in this category, or for even some union organizations, which we also have in the sort of portfolio. What's the important thing, and where does the role of points, where is it important, necessary, or what does it do? So it's a general question trying to cover a number of topics in a single one.
Absolutely, and I'm sure that company you're referring to is Macy's, and I've worked with the Office of Personnel Management. I've worked with about 100 different government agencies, and the starting point was no gifts. Okay, every organization has constraints, and a lot of questions were about that. We're in manufacturing, we're in this, and we're doing that. We're small, and I don't know if it's human nature, but everyone kind of tends to start with what they can't do, and then that paralyzes. Now we can't do gifts, so we can't do anything. It's like, forget about that. Start with your constraints, identify them, and then work around them. Within those constraints, what could we still do? And you will find an infinite number of possibilities, starting with, and the foundation for this whole topic is behavior. It's not stuff, it's not points, it's behavior. It's the human interaction of the things. That's the home room on this. And so do that first. It doesn't cost any money. In fact, in my research, the top 5 or 6 motivators, it might sound sacrosanct to some of you, don't involve any money at all. Now, it's not saying money's not important. Of course, we need money. We got to pay our bills and stuff. But the things that make people feel special is usually the personal things, the thanks, the being asked their opinion, being involved in a decision, especially if that decision affects them. 89% of employees say that they want that. 94% say good two-way communication. You know, you have a question, you can get an answer to it. Being, if you make a mistake, focusing on the learning, not the blame. These are behaviors, all behaviors, they cost nothing. Yet there are huge drivers of motivation and what it feels like to work in your organization. And, you know, I've worked with a lot of organizations where it's kind of like a blame game. I remember I worked with one manufacturing company in North Carolina, and they started every morning they had a company-wide meeting, and it was just a blame game. Number 2 turbine went down. Joe was getting coffee. No, I wasn't. You know, bam, 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 bam. And I said, you guys are killing yourself every day a little bit. Start with the positive. The positive. What did someone do that was good? Just do one thing. And they did that. And then ask, does anyone else have anything positive they want to share? And initially, people had a blank look, you know, what are we doing? And then someone said, well, I've got something. I got one of my clients got bounced to the wrong person, and they've been passed around a few, and Sally got it, and she took the time to take care of the client. Sally, thanks for covering for me. And all of a sudden, it was very powerful. And now everyone started with a positive urgency and the sense of what we're doing together, and it was magical. It was magical just by saying we're going to start with the positive. It's going to be, and again, it was all behavior. And then once you're doing the behavior, you know, you can add in points, you can add in comp, you can add in time off, you can add in trips, you can add in whatever. That's fine. But I find if you start with, you know, the party, and, you know, I worked with one company, they said last year it was a sit down. This year it's a buffet, and now they're just, you know, now they're grousing about it. The party wasn't nice enough, you know. So don't give them that chance. Start with have it be a positive thing. And
let me add on the context and the interesting, you know, case study and point relative to those questions and what we're talking about. Recognition is not points and rewards. All right, they are a dimension, and they are an experiential component to the experience. But the first experience that people need to be remembered front and center is we need to appreciate people for when they do well, right? And we do that in whatever form we can. So the questions about, well, it's great if you could do it in person and make telephone calls. Absolutely. That takes time, requires you to be in the same office, some of which is not possible or doable. 2, you've got now the capacity of this amazing device that's in everybody's hands to do it at massive scale. And that we've had the help of people like Facebook and Instagram and the various others train populations on the importance of sharing information and content. So everybody's already trained. It's just they're not trained to orientate in recognition language and recognition language around your organization. And so the interesting case study and case in point with the retailer that we mentioned, originally we had points. At some point, budget constraints, the points were removed. Oh my gosh, the whole thing will fall apart. No, absolutely not. The storytelling component was just emphasized. Now, having points and rewards, let us assure you, is the magic dust in programs. And it separates sort of general recognition and then creates contextual layers. So great when you can do it. Your program will speed up faster and probably touch more people and more frequently and have some gamification reward components. But it doesn't take away from the fact that recognition is, you know, so fundamental and important, and that is the focus of what the program is and how to elicit recognition. So I don't know, Phil, if you wanted to add or comment
onto that, Michael, that not only was it just they just were left with the stories, but those kept happening, and they now average 20,000 a month on people just telling what a great story someone else did. And talk about being a part of your culture. People are glad to come to work. They're glad to help others. because that's what's been called out.
Great,
Now that's what they live by.
Thank you. I got lost in that. So the nut of the story was 10 years ago, the points disappeared. Is the program still there, hugely successful, and continues to grow and still doesn't have points? Again, has different dimensions, and each program has its own characteristics and attributes. Points have a role. But to Bob's point, if you can't do it, don't not recognize people, right? That's the message. You should still recognize people, and you'll use what you can, either with internal processes and the way you do it, or your email or your text messages. Sure, we can help you put a platform in place. Absolutely, we'd love to. But even if you can't put a platform in place, you should still do it.
I worked with FedEx after 9/11, and things were very harsh, and they had wonderful programs, but each of them had a cost to them, and they had to cut back to survive. And I you know, in talking to them what they're doing, I said, you threw out the baby with the bath is what you did here, is because you killed all your programs because they each had a financial cost. Now you're not doing any recognition, and this at a time when people need it more than ever. And they said, oh my God, you're right. And so, you know, and you could say, hey, another time this might have had a, you know, $1,000 bonus with it, and we're gonna get back to those times. But right now we gotta say, you made it happen, Gary, and our success. And so the money aspect is for recognition often ends up being a killer. I find that I've worked with a lot of organizations where, because they weren't doing anything, the employees said, well, the only thing that they had any feedback at all that something went well was they got a bump, they got a bonus, they got a spot bonus, they got more in their merit pay. And so that was the only thing going on to recognize, and that was the only currency they have. So nothing else happened. And so, you know, someone would say, hey, my boss just went, did a great job in the hallway at that presentation. Did he give you any on the spot bonus? No, it was in the hallway. Well, it must not have been that important. And so you can train your population that's only money that matters, and they will respond, I guarantee you. And now you gotta dish out more and more money, and often it'll be for less and less value because you owe me, you know. So don't go on that slippery slope.
So Phil, any last closing comment from you before I do the wind up?
Yeah, to your question, I would say about 85–90% of the recognition on our program is all social recognition without points. That doesn't mean people don't like points. In fact, we promote them. Charles, if you want to pop up that thing, we're actually running a promotion tomorrow. It's a, you know, season to give thanks. We're encouraging employees every hour to, well, actually, we're encouraging people to give recognition to their peers. Just a reminder to thank people all day long. Now, this is no points, and we're going to every hour pick one person, and the provider and recipient of that feedback will get points. And this is just a way to kind of break things up, bring energy back into it. You know, we have new employees. Sometimes they don't remember to download the app on their phone. So we include a QR code, which takes you right to the app store, whether it's Google Play or the Apple App Store. And, you know, it's funny, we get people that go, well, how do you log in? And we help them do it. The amount of energy we'll see tomorrow, it lights it up. You know, through Google Analytics, we can see a tremendous amount of traction around this for a really, really low cost.
And you're highlighting the power of technology, and you're doing an important thing that everyone needs to do. You can't, you know, you can't plop a program in the organization and expect it's going to magically take off. You got to chip away at it. You got to give reminders, and by doing any one thing, it reminds everyone of then everything else that is available for them to do. And so it's a very smart strategy to, and as you do that, as you chip away at it, overall, you'll have a stronger culture for that effort.
All right, we're at the end of the hour. Thank you, everybody, for being part of it. There'll be a follow-up, and we're going to, as Bob said, compile the questions, all 77 of them, and do our best to respond either individually or in group. Phil and Bob, thank you so much for being available. I thought it was a great
time. You ask the question, you get a book. I put my heart and soul in this, Recognizing and Engaging Employees for Dummies. So that will come to your doorstep, and to help you keep going. And that's send a question if you didn't get it answered here, because we haven't done them yet. Then you could still get that book, and we'd love to have your questions as well.
All right, so we'll be sending a follow-up email to collect address and contact information for copies of Bob's books, as well as copies of the questions and a copy of the webinar. And we'll look forward to seeing you in December. Peace to the world and peace to all of you. Thanks, everybody. Have a great week. Thank you to our speakers, Bob and Philip.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.